And we are ready to go.
Cool.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club. This is August 23rd, 2015, and we have a special guest with us today, Demosthenes from theonering.net. He's the moderator of our Hall of Fire, and also one of the big people who posts our stories.
Yeah, I haven't been doing a lot of that lately. I've been taking a break and be busy. But yeah, I'm glad to be here on the show. Thank you for inviting me, Josh.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming. And yes, I should mention that Demosthenes is in Australia, so it's probably what, about 4 or 5 in the morning over there right now.
It's just gone 5 a.m. It's very early.
Wow. So, well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, so today we're going to be delving once again into the Silmarillion. We are in our final 5 episodes of the Silmarillion, and I never thought we'd actually get this far.
It's
We're
a tough read um, if you're a newbie.
Yeah,
I remember when I started out, I found the first chapters especially quite difficult.
yeah. Like, it took me a while to get into it, and I'll be honest, going over it chapter by chapter and having to reread every chapter over and over and over again for every episode has really sort of like helped me sort of see what Tolkien was trying to do with this.
And we're drilling the names too, and a lot of
Yeah.
people find it the hardest thing.
Yeah, there are lots of names in this, it and so many characters just sort of come and go. And
Mm.
speaking of which, the chapters that we're going to be doing today is going to have a lot of more characters going.
Yes, more going than coming.
Yeah, like we get a couple new characters at the end. Temple was wondering how to spell your name. I think you got it right, Temple.
That is correct.
I Still the One Ring is saying, let's just say this helped me read the Silmarillion. Well, I'm very glad to hear you say that. That makes me feel good. So this week we're going to be doing 2 chapters: the Ruin of Doriath and the Fall of Gondolin. And we're doing these two together mostly because, first of all, they're a bit shorter than the last couple chapters we went through. So can probably get through more that way. And also, these 2 chapters kind of run concurrently with each other, like chronologically wise. Um, so and I we had a little bit of an email discussion about this between me and Dem, and we decide like we kind of agreed that it's probably best to sort of stick to each chapter rather than try to bounce between the two as the chronology goes along.
I think from my memory, the chronology is about 2 or 3 years apart, so the events are quite close together in the
Yeah,
context of the greatest Silmarillion anyway.
yeah, and they both sort of end in the same place.
And they do, yes.
Um, but yeah, I think yeah, technically the chapter of Gondolin starts way before the
Mm.
chapter of Doriath, but then it goes through a whole lot of events, and they both sort of end up in the same place.
A sad place.
Yes, a very sad place. so so I'm gonna start this. Bring up the big board. Just a couple things here. There we go. Um, One of the things I want to start out with is to just sort of give people a little bit of a refresher on where we stand as far as the events go, and who is and isn't still here. Um, because what we had initially, when the elves first came to Middle Earth, they they began with, or established, I should say, probably 6 major strongholds. So we have the big one here called Hithlum, which is, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of their capital. Like, that's where the High King of the Noldor lives, and that's where their strongest powers are. Then we have a little fortress here in the east called Himring, which is run by Maethros, the eldest son of Feanor. And they've sort of lived off to the side, trying to keep out of events because Maethros in particular knows what a disruptive force they can be. Then we have the Havens in the west, which are led by Círdan, the shipwright. We have the Hidden Kingdom of Doriath, which is run by King Thingol. And then we have 2 other hidden kingdoms. We have Nargothrond here, which was led by Finrod Felagund. And finally, Gondolin, which is led by Turgon. And through the course of events, a lot of these have been destroyed. Hithlum has been completely overrun at this point. And all the elves have either been driven out or have gone into hiding, and the men who are left have become subjects of Easterlings. Then we have Himring, which has also been overrun, and the Sons of Feanor have basically been reduced to refugee status out in, I believe, like around in the Blue Mountains.
Or far to the south.
Oh, right, sorry, more to the south.
They retreated beyond the Ramdal wall, I think.
Beyond which one?
The wall called Ramdal or something like that.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, so they're, that's right. Yeah, they're further south with the brothers who joined up with the Green Elves.
Yes.
But either way,
but
like
basically they're out of the picture at the moment.
Yeah, they're pretty much they're living as refugees at this point. Temple saying, "Geez, not easy to keep these strongholds. Maybe they should be called weakholds." To be fair, all of these stayed intact up until the last big battle, the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears. And it was the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears that overran Hithlum, Himring, and the Havens in Eglarest and Brithembar, and drove all the shipwrights, all the seafaring elves, way down south to the mouth of the river Syrian, which is right about here. And then in the last chapter with Turin and Turambar, Glaurung came out and destroyed Nargothrond. So at this point, there are now only 2 kingdoms left. There's Doriath and there's Gondolin. And both of those are going to fall this week. So it's been a lot of tragedy and destruction over the last few chapters.
And everything that Mandos said
in
his curse is slowly coming true.
Yeah, like that's the thing that I loved. Like, the first line of Mandos's curse is "Tears unnumbered shall ye have," or something like that, and then
Shed, I think it is.
Yeah, and then the big battle that destroys everything is the Battle of Unnumbered Tears.
And it's not just that Melkor is doing it; it's that the curse of Feanor is doing it too.
Yeah, like this is as much brought on by themselves as Morgoth.
They're almost their own worst enemies.
Yeah. And we're going to see that in uh, the two the two chapters that we're going to go into with Doriath and Gondolin. I don't think it's any spoiler here that they both fall, but in very different ways.
They do. Yeah, I always thought that Doriath falls more to, I guess, hubris and the curse, and whereas um, you notice that Morgoth never comes directly against it.
Right.
Doesn't send any forces against it. It's all
But
internal
yeah.
shenanigans that
Well, I
drag.
would say he does send one thing that's sort of like the instigator for all of this.
Ah, yes, Hurin.
Yes. um, because like even at the end, Hurin admits that he was being used by Morgoth, and what he brings to Doriath kind of sets off a chain of events that will lead to its downfall.
Mm.
I mean that's the way I saw it anyway.
Yes, yes. No, I agree.
Aravandi's asking, is that Demosthenes on the phone? Yes, it is.
Hi.
uh, are you familiar with Aravandi?
I recognize the name.
Okay.
Um, that's as much as I can remember.
Okay. It's early in the morning for you. I understand.
It's,
So
I'm great with names, bad with faces.
so let's get into the chapter and sort of go through the events that we'll be seeing. So we're going to start with the chapter on the ruin of Doriath, and we're actually going to pick up probably, I'd say, about a year or so after the end of the chapter of Turin, with his father Hurin, who is still chained up in the chair up in Angband, and he's been forced over all these years to watch Turin slowly be destroyed. And one of the things I want to point out is that this has been sort of, God, how do I want to put it? What Hurin has been seeing has been skewed because he's seeing everything through Morgoth's eyes, and so Morgoth is only showing him the bad and keeping away the good. So what Hurin is seeing is he's been seeing Turin fleeing out of Doriath. He's seen him get betrayed by his friends. He's seen him accidentally kill his best friend. He's seen him unknowingly marry his sister. He's seen him get killed by the dragon. But what he hasn't seen are, or no, not killed by the dragon. He's seen him kill himself. But what he hasn't seen is Turin's happy childhood being raised up in Doriath. He's seen only the bad. And so it's at this point that Morgoth decides, you know what? I'm gonna let you go. You've seen enough. You've been tortured enough. And so he tries to sort of make it look like he's showing him mercy or taking pity on him by releasing him,
Mm.
but that's not how Morgoth works. So what he's actually doing is he's sending Hurin out in order to find, for a couple reasons. One is to find the location of Gondolin, because Hurin, he knows, is one of the few people who knows where it is. And that's the whole reason that he kept him alive, was to try to get that location out of him. And the other is to sort of take all this tortured anger that he's been forcing on Hurin this whole time and have him turn it loose on Doriath. And so what we have essentially is Hurin wandering around after he's released, kind of retracing Turin's steps. he begins by going to Dorloman and finding it all overrun with Easterlings, and the Easterlings and the orcs sort of have implicit orders that they are to sort of give Hurin a wide berth. And so because of that, everybody thinks that Hurin is somehow in league with or has been corrupted by Morgoth. So nobody is going to help him, and Hurin actually does like call out to Turgon because he wants to go back to Gondolin. Let me see if I can find the line. Like he cries out to Turgon at one point.
I found it. Turgon, Turgon, remember the fen of Serek. O Turgon, will you not hear in your hidden halls?
Yes, there it is. That's it.
But there was no sound save the wind and the dry grasses.
Yeah, because while all this has been happening, the Eagles have been kind of monitoring him and bringing word of him to Turgon, and Turgon buys into this idea that Hurin has been corrupted by Morgoth and refuses to go out and help him, or he says my heart is shut, and so after a little while, Turgon sort of recants that and tries to send out the Eagles to find him, but at this point it's too late. Hurin has moved on.
King has to make tough choices.
Yeah. Like so yeah, look, so the next thing we have with Hurin is he goes to Turin's grave, which is actually Turin and Nianor's grave. And he sees a woman there, sort of hunched over, curled up next to the grave, and as she turns up to look at him, he realizes that this old woman is in fact Morwen, his wife, who ran off after as she was trying to find Turin and sort of disappeared and was never found up until this moment. And she's very old, she's very weak, and so is Hurin at this point too. So like, these are two people who have really sort of been through hell and find each other at the end. And Morwen asks a very pointed question that Hurin is afraid to answer, and she asks about Nienor, how did she find him? Like, what were the circumstances of Turin and Nienor meeting? And as we know, it was not something that great. And so Hurin actually doesn't answer that question. And then she fades and dies. And it's actually like a very touching bit of dialogue between the two of them, with Morwen saying, "You come at last. I've waited too long." And Hurin answers, "It was a dark road. I have come as I could." "But you are too late. They are lost." "I know it, but you are not." "Almost. I am spent. I shall go with the sun. Now little time is left. If you know, tell me, how did she find him?" And then in the morning she passes away without knowing what happened. But he buries her and says something. He says something along the lines of, she was not conquered. Of all of them, she was the only one who really never succumbed to some sort of evil plot. And so he buries Morwen with their children, and then carves on the gravestone, here lies also Morwen Elethwen. And then we get a little foreshadowing, because they talk about the ruin of the world, or the changing of the world, which isn't going to happen in these chapters. It'll happen later on, when basically all of this area that we've been seeing, all of Beleriand, is going to go underwater. But the grave of Morwen, Turin, and Nienor stays uncorrupted and actually becomes its own small island called Tol Morwen.
I think that can be found on some maps as well.
Probably, yeah.
I know definitely Himling, that hill that you mentioned right at the start, it survives too.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I know there's a couple islands that survive the devastation to come.
But yeah, 90% of it all goes underwater.
Yeah. So after this very sad, very touching scene between Hurin and Morwen, Hurin then continues his journey. He's not quite done yet. He goes to Nargothrond, which has been ruined and overtaken by Glaurung, and then Turin has killed Glaurung, and so the halls remain empty because everybody is afraid of the vengeful spirit of Glaurung, except for one person.
Mim.
Yes. I'm trying to read some of the comments here. Temple saying, it's really amazing to think about how Tolkien wrote. Many people write about characters. He wrote about a place with characters in it. That's very true. Like, I would say, like, Beleriand, Middle-earth, all that are as much a character as, like, any of the other characters are in this. But, yeah, so Hurin goes into Nargothrond and finds one lone resident, and that is Mim the Dwarf, who we will remember was the dwarf who betrayed Turin to Morgoth, and then fled because he's a wimpy little coward. And through the telling of the story of Mim and the petty dwarves, we get the story of how these petty dwarves, who were refugees, who were banished by the seven kingdoms of the dwarves long before the elves even came to Middle-earth, they went out to Beleriand and started creating their own homes, and the caves in Nargothrond were one of those places that they had. And so now he sort of feels like he's coming to reclaim his birthright. And Hurin says, no, you're not. And very quickly kills Mim. And then Hurin sort of stays in Nargothrond by himself for some time, among all the treasures, but eventually one day he does leave, but he only takes one thing with him. It's a very special treasure, which I think I mentioned a long time ago, called the Nauglamir. And this was a special necklace that was created for
Finrod.
For Finrod, yeah. It was created for him by the dwarves, and so it was it was a symbol of the friendship between elves and dwarves. And it was one of his most prized possessions. And so Hurin has taken that, and he is now on his way to the last stop on Hurin's farewell tour, Doriath. And like I said, what he has been seeing through Morgoth's eyes has been only the negative. He hasn't seen any of the positive. So he hasn't seen any of Turin's happy childhood growing up in Doriath. And so he considers Thingol to be as much an enemy to his family as anybody else is.
This is that curse at work.
Yeah, this is the curse at work for sure. Uh,
You'd also have to think that would the power of Melian fence out that of the ability of Morgoth to show Huron what was going on within Doriath itself, so he wouldn't see any much of that, just what happens afterwards.
yeah, well, I think
Then,
well,
then
Million kind of does do that. Like, um, after like, well, we should at least say what Horan does first.
mm,
Um, he comes up to Thingol and basically takes the Naglamir and throws it at his feet and says, "This is thy fee." And like basically sort of like spits in his face like all the wrong that he's done. Like basically he blames Thingol for the death of Finrod. He blames Thingol for the the hardship that Torrin has had to go through, and he does it all just by casting this beautiful treasure at his feet and saying, "There, that's your fee for ruining my family." And it's at that point that Melian steps in. Let's see if I can find her. Here she is. It's at that point that Melian steps in and tells him, "You've only been seeing part of the story," and Thingol, to his credit, has been holding back his own rage at this insubordination. Um, but Melian,
you have to compare it against his words later on to the dwarves,
yeah,
which are extremely arrogant.
oh
So
yeah, yeah,
in this context, Thingol is quite restrained, and what Huron says is extraordinarily insulting in the context of a lord within his own hall.
right. Like I mean, this is probably one of the gravest insults that Thingol has ever gotten to his face. Um, but Melian is able to talk him down and tell him, you haven't seen everything that has happened. You haven't seen Torrin's happy childhood. Morgoth hasn't shown you everything. And either and I would say that it's more through her own power of being able to remove the skewing of vision from Horan that he relents. Like I mean, she talks it up for sure, but I think it's more than just words that finally like turn Horan from being just full of rage to realizing what he's just done. And so instead, so what he does is after Melian has spoken to him, he then takes the Naglamir and presents it to Thingol in a much more formal and respectful way. And like,
Yeah, the other thing to note is an important one. She says, "Long was Turin thy son fostered in the halls of Menegroth and shown love and honour and son of the king. It was not by the king's will nor by mine that he never came back."
right.
What she's saying is, you can't save people from themselves.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a
No, that's
she's making a big argument about free choices and free will here. People have the capacity to do what they want. Sometimes that's not always a good thing.
right. No, that's absolutely true, and that's like,
events showed.
I think that's like the biggest takeaway from the story of Torin to begin with. Because
Yes.
because Torin throughout the story was given like opportunity after opportunity to go back to Doriath and to live a good life again,
Mm.
and he just refused every time. And so and hearing the words of Melian, Hurin stood moveless, and he gazed long into the eyes of the queen, and there in Menegroth, defended still by the girdle of Melian from the darkness of the enemy, he read the truth in all that was done, and tasted at last the fullness of woe that was measured for him by Morgoth. And it's a combination of Melian's words and her power to remove the veil from everything. And so he takes the Nauglamir and he gives it to Thingol in a much more respectful way, but also in a very sort of sad way. Like, what he says to him is, "Receive now, Lord, the necklace of the dwarves, as a gift from one who has nothing, as a memorial of Hurin of Dorloman. For now my fate is fulfilled, and the purpose of Morgoth achieved. But I am his thrall no longer." So, and with that, Hurin leaves. And from there, we don't really get a clear picture of what happens to him. It's said rather vaguely that he wandered the world for some time, and then when he felt completely and utterly spent, he went out to the sea and threw himself into it. So, and that's
Another happy ending for a Silmarillion character.
yeah. It's like we'll just chalk that up to yet another tragic ending to another character, and the family of like Hurin's family, and I believe it's the house of Hador that they were a part of.
Yep.
Like this is just a tragic end, like from start to finish with them, and so that's how Hurin ends, and even like I just finished reading the novel The Children of Hurin, and that book ends on the incredibly sad moment of Hurin meeting Morwen at their grave, and it's incredibly tragic and incredibly depressing.
Mm. Well, you don't get the rest because it's not kind of relevant to the tale. The tale goes on, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. So to keep it self-contained, I imagine that's why Chris Tolkien chose to end it where he did.
Probably, he did a good job of like showing Hurin's parts where he's relevant to this story, and then moving on to what this story is actually about. And of course, what this story is really about is Thingol and Doriath. And so now Thingol has the Nauglamir, and he also has, let me see if I can find it, he also has a Silmaril. He has the only Silmaril that's been cut from the crown of Morgoth, and he's been hanging on to it, and like so many of these other items in Middle Earth, he's becoming more and more tempted by it. Well, I guess tempted isn't really the right word, but he's sort of like feeling an overwhelming desire to have it. He's always keeping it with him. This Erebon saying we should make a drinking game. Every time a character dies tragically, we take a shot. I don't recommend that, because you could probably do some real damage to yourself with that.
You'd be drunk for weeks.
Yeah. So Thingol has a Silmaril, and he decides that he wants to mount the Silmaril into the Nauglamir. And so
in itself, you'd think that's not a crazy idea.
No, it's not, because like he's just carrying this thing loose, and it would be nice to have it as part of something you could wear. And so what better than like melding the greatest achievement of the elves and the greatest achievement of the dwarves into one thing. And so now Doriath has where are they? Has a number of dwarves who are in residence, because they have Menegroth, the city of Menegroth was built uh, was built by dwarves and elves together, and so Thingol has had a number of dwarven smiths come in and out of Doriath for quite some time, and so there are a number of dwarves already there, and he gives them this task to take the Nauglamir and reforge it and mount the Silmaril in it. And the dwarves they do this, but of course because of the corrupting and tempting power of the Silmaril, they also end up desiring it. That also, and the fact that the Nauglamir is the greatest achievement of the dwarves, they desire that too. So when it all comes to an end, when they finish their task and they've mounted the Silmaril in the Nauglamir and created this beautiful, gorgeous piece of jewelry, and it should be noted that Thingol has sort of become a little unstable at this point because of the Silmaril. Like, he is there in their smithies, sort of watching over their shoulders the whole time. And
he's obsessed.
yeah, he's very much obsessed. Like, I guess, like, sort of how you could see, like, in the Hobbit movies, the way Thorin reacted to the Arkenstone.
You have to, yes.
Yeah.
In some ways, Thingol is a prototype for the Elven King, actually.
Yeah.
Same haul, same kind of attitude to money.
Yeah.
Although Thingol has much more of it. He's already a wealthy man, of course.
Yeah. I mean, he's pretty much like he's got more wealth than he will ever need. But this is a special.
He has no need for gold.
Right. But the Nauglamir is a very special treasure.
Yes.
And so he's been watching over the dwarves, and when they finish, he says, "Okay, I'll take that now." And the dwarves say, "Oh, no, you don't. This is ours." And this is when Thingol kind of shows his true colors. Okay, so the dwarves say to him, "By what right does the Elven King lay claim to the Nauglamir that was made by our fathers for Finrod Felagund, who is dead? It has come to him but by the hand of Hurin, the man of Dor Lomin, who took it as a thief out of the darkness of Nargothrond." And Thingol hears this and basically says back to them, "How do ye of uncouth race dare to demand aught of me, Elu Thingol, Lord of Beleriand, whose life began by the waters of Quevian in years uncounted, ere the fathers of the stunted people awoke?" So, like, they're just throwing insults back and forth at each other, and it finally it escalates and escalates to the point where the dwarves kill Thingol.
You'd have to wonder if he would have realized his peril.
You would think so, like, being surrounded by angry dwarves, like, but at this point, Thingol was just so far gone that he really sort of put himself into that. But yeah, because of that, Thingol, one of the oldest of the Elven kings, has died, and with that, the dwarves steal the Nauglamir and try to escape Doriath. That doesn't go too well for them. They are eventually waylaid, and the Nauglamir is taken back. Excuse me. The Nauglamir is taken back into Doriath, and I think the one who really helped with that was Mablung, who was one of Thingol's chief lieutenants. But But there are two dwarves who do get away, and we'll get to them in a second. Because what we have now is it was is Melian seeing that Thingol has died, and pretty much her only reason for being in Middle Earth has left. And Erevandi's saying, I was sad when Thingol died. I kind of liked him. Like, I...
He shows great flashes of insight quite often.
Yeah.
And then he does stupid things.
Yes, he does. He can be very haughty, and he can be very full of himself, but at the same time, he can also show like great wisdom and mercy, like particularly with the story of Turin.
Mm.
But I mean, he's also he's one of the three original kings of the elves, one of which, and he's the only one of them in Middle Earth. The other two went to Valinor. One of them died in Valinor, and the other one stayed. And so this is a really tragic death, and more importantly, this is a turning point for Melian, because now she has no real reason to stay, and so she has this really nice moment with Mablung, where she's sort of reliving her life with Thingol all over again in her mind, and she confides in Mablung that she's going to leave, and that Mablung needs to send word to Beren and Luthien, and send the Silmaril and the send the Nauglamir to them. And so as she leaves, so does her protection of Doriath. And so for the first time in God knows how many centuries, the kingdom of Doriath is open. And this is where the dwarves come back in. These two survivors of the escape from Doriath, they make it all the way back to their home, which is the dwarf city of Nogrod. And they tell the story of what happened, but of course they're spinning it into their favor, saying that Thingol betrayed them and killed them, and kept the Nauglamir for himself. And so and the kings of Nogrod are like, they're all enraged by this, and they're ready to go to war and get the Nauglamir back. But there's another kingdom near them called Belagos, which is another dwarf kingdom that is pretty much saying like, they're trying to like cooler heads prevail, but the dwarves of Nogrod aren't hearing this, and they assemble an army, and they go back to Doriath, which is now open, and begin a full...
It's not just that, it's leaderless as well. And that's important.
Yeah.
It's the death of Thingol has left them in chaos.
Yeah, that's true, because Doriath isn't just open, like, the elves don't know what to do now. Like, they're grieving, they're confused, they don't know what's happening, and then a dwarf army comes in. And this is now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this is pretty much what causes the great schism between elves and dwarves, and why when we get to them in Lord of the Rings they hate each other so much.
This would have been part of it.
Yeah.
In wider mythology, I recall that originally elves weren't even convinced that dwarves, or at least petty dwarves, were human,
Yeah.
and hunted them. And that has something to do with it. It took them a long while to work out that they're actually, thinking beings. So that's a little bit of wider mythology.
Yeah. Because, it says, "For there was a battle in the thousand caves, and many elves and dwarves were slain, and it has not been forgotten."
Certainly not by Celeborn.
No, definitely not by Celeborn.
No,
Because he was there.
he might have been there. We're not sure.
Well, I guess I just
there
sort of
at some
assumed he was
point.
there.
They might. He and Galadriel may have left earlier, or they may have been there for the fall.
Yeah, I wasn't
It's
sure if like that was elaborated on in History of Middle
unfin-
Earth or anything else.
unfinished tales is really messy. There's history of Galadriel and Celeborn,
Yeah.
but yeah, I invite other people to work it out. It just does my head in.
Okay.
Yeah, there's so many different stories,
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
versions.
There really are. Yeah. Uh.
But
So.
yes, entity much.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So So yeah. So the dwarves come in. They They're. It's a huge battle in Doriath, and eventually, um, Mablung, who is sort of one of the few elves who sort of has a purpose, which is to guard the Nauglamir at all costs. And he does guard it at all costs because they kill him.
You'd
And
think he'd be like, I guess the Thingol's, Doriath's captain as well.
yeah,
If there's anyone, it would be him
you
in
would
charge.
you would think, but I sort of felt like beyond Doriath, the Silmaril is probably the highest priority, or at least that's how he saw it.
Mm.
Um, because I mean, Doriath without Thingol or Melian is pretty much useless, and I think that's probably how he saw it. But regardless, Mablung is killed. The dwarves take the Nauglamir and begin their victory march back to Nogrod. But that's when we enter a couple old friends, because on the island of Tall Gallen, which is the home of Baron and Luthien, they've received word about what has happened. And so Baron joins forces with, or not really joins forces, but uses his friendship with the Green Elves of Osirian to stage a counterattack against the dwarves. And this is much more. The Green Elves really work more with guerrilla warfare. They attack from the trees. They attack in secrecy, and they're able to overtake the dwarves, and they're able to steal back the Nauglamir.
And Beren slays the Lord of Nogrod.
Yes, and yes, Baron slays the Lord of Nogrod, who he's just called the Lord of Nogrod. I don't know if he has a name anywhere else.
He has a name in the Book of Lost Tales.
Okay.
And I can't remember at the moment.
Okay.
Similar character. But yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, that's the one thing that I noticed in the Silmarillion, and I'm sort of chalking this up to the fact that it's actually supposed to be an Elvish history, and that's the fact that there are very few dwarves who are given a name in
Mm.
in this book. Like, you got a couple, like you got Azagal, and
And Tel-
who?
Telkar.
So, yes. Um,
And of course the petty dwarves.
yeah, the petty dwarves, Meme, Heem, and God, what is the other son's name?
Starts with B, doesn't it?
I think so.
I haven't read it for a while.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There's so many names. Like, believe me, folks, you're lucky we can remember as many as we do.
have trouble remembering my own name some days.
Yeah, I know, right? So, so Baron steals back the Nauglamir, and he brings it back to Tol Gallen, which is his home with Luthien and their son Dior, and also Dior's three children, who I remember one of their names, and I have to find the name of the other two.
Elurid, Elurin, and Elwing.
Yes, Elwing I remember because she plays an important role.
Yes.
Elred and Elrin, um, they're they're in it, but they don't really have big roles.
They're a bit like the sons of King Richard who disappear in
Yeah,
the in English history. Those twins.
yeah. It's kind of the same way.
Same fate. Yeah.
Yeah. So Baron takes possession of the Nauglamir, and he gives it to Luthien, and she wears it, and because it's Luthien wearing it, who has such great power, um, nobody's going to challenge her for it. Nobody's going to come and try to take it from her. And so because of that, the Silmaril is safe. Someone was asking, so can you remember the 7 names of the 7 dwarves in Snow White? Yes, Sleepy, Happy, Grumpy, Dopey, Sleepy, Happy, Grumpy, Dopey, Sneezy, Bashful, Doc.
Sleazy.
Yes. uh,
This is I think the most clearly evil act that a dwarf probably does in the entire Silmarillion, that's for sure. But maybe in the wider mythology too.
you mean with the killing of Thingol?
Yeah,
Yeah,
killing Thingol and taking it. It's
yeah.
an evil.
It is.
Even if Thingol really was um, keeping their fee from them, it's
Mhm.
still way over the top.
Yeah, it really was. Like, I
No
mean,
way justified.
no, and I sort of chalk that up to the dwarves being rather hot blooded and quick to judgment themselves already,
Yes,
and
which
also
it's
just succumbing to the tempting power of the Silmaril. Like you combine those two together, and you create this very volatile mix.
yes. The dwarves of Novgorod seem to be slightly more um, trigger happy than
Yeah,
the Belagos too.
yeah, because like that was the one thing that I liked with them was like how the dwarves of Nogrod go to Belagos to try to get reinforcements, and Belagos says, "No, this is too much. We need to sort of take a step back on this."
Mm.
And the dwarves of Nogrod say, "Well, screw you then. We're going anyway."
Which
And
works out badly
and
for everyone.
it works out badly for them, but it kind of works out okay for Baron and Luthien, because they do get the Nauglamir, and the Silmaril is back in Baron's possession, which is the first time he's had it since he first cut it from Morgoth's crown. But Luthien wears it. Nobody is going to challenge her possession of it. And so with that, their son, Dior, he decides that he's going to go back to Doriath and he's going to try to rebuild this kingdom. And so he takes with him his 3 children, and they go to the ruins of Doriath, and they begin to rebuild it and try to bring Doriath back to its former glory. And that seems to be going well until one day, Dior receives a special message from Tol Gallen, and that message is... Here. That message is quite simply the Nauglamir. It's been passed to him, which is really a very oversimplified way of saying the Baron and Luthien, who are mortal, have finally died. And so Dior takes the Nauglamir, and he takes the Silmaril into his possession, which is pretty much his birthright now. And word of that goes around that word that Dior has the Nauglamir and the Silmaril starts to get out, and that's when a certain group of people decide that it's time for them to exercise their claim on it. And those are the Sons of Feanor. Maethros, Celegorm Corfin, Caranthir, Maglor, and Amrod and Amras. I think that's all of them. All the seven sons, they send word to Doriath that Dior should surrender the Silmaril to them. Dior, of course, has also fallen power to the Silmaril and says no. So, with that, the Sons of Feanor then lead their own attack onto Doriath. And this is another brutal battle where actually 3 of the 7 Sons of Feanor are killed. Celegorm, Corfin, and Caranthir all get killed in this battle, and I believe Dior himself kills Celegorm. I think
That's
I'm remembering that right.
Yes, that's right.
And I Stole the One Ring is saying maybe Tolkien should have just wrote "They all die." The end. Well,
they can't exactly not do something. The oath won't let them rest.
Right, they have to do something.
They have to do something. They're more constrained than the dwarves are. I have some pity for them. I mean,
I do too.
They're slaves to their own stupidity, but by the same token, they can't not do something. Otherwise, they are forsworn.
Right,
and oaths have huge power in Middle Earth.
Yeah, and you sort of see that mostly with like characters like Maethros and Maglor, who really don't want to do this but know that they have to. As opposed to characters like Celegorm and Corfin, who really like believe in their hearts that this is the righteous thing for them to do.
Which shows that they're not all, I guess, cookie cutters of each other.
Right, they're not. But they all in some respect or another have that fire of Feanor in them.
Yes.
But I think Maethros and Maglor, more than any of the others, are able to sort of resist that fire. As opposed to Celegorm and Corfin, who just straight up embrace it. They're like, we will do everything underhanded and evil that we can in order to get the Silmaril. And in the end, it worked out great for them. So
they're still not getting what they want.
No.
Again, like Mandos said, you'll look for it and hunt for it, and it will slip through your fingers.
Yep.
And it does.
And that's exactly what happens to them, because after this battle, and after 3 of the 7 Sons of Feanor have been killed, the Nauglamir is still nowhere to be found, because it's been spirited away secretly by Dior's daughter, Elwing. Now, her 2 brothers, they were driven out into the wild and lost. They were never found again. But Elwing, with a small group of elves and supporters, she's able to take the Nauglamir and run off and escape from Doriath. And she makes it all the way down south to the havens of Syrian. I believe that's where she ends up.
Yes, that's correct.
Um, and so she has the Silmaril with her. So yet again, it slips out of the grasp of the Sons of Feanor, and now they've lost almost half their rank.
And they've done the work of Morgoth again.
Yes, because after this battle, now Doriath is
no more.
It's destroyed utterly.
So Morgoth destroys Doriath without barely lifting a finger.
Yeah, like this is like Morgoth destroys Doriath very indirectly, which is why I like that the two of these sort of go back to back, because we have the ruin of Doriath, which is Morgoth destroying an elven kingdom in a very indirect way, more through manipulation than anything else, as opposed to what we're going to get to in Gondolin, which is much more a direct attack.
Yes, very much so. But still, traitors within too.
Oh yeah. That's the thing with Morgoth, is that he's always manipulating. That's how he works. He corrupts and he manipulates. But in the end, with Gondolin, we have a much more direct attack from Angband than Doriath ever had.
Yes, no, the foes of Morgoth are, apart from the first battle under Starlight, I think they never invaded Doriath itself.
Yeah.
And that was a long, long time ago in this book. That's like going back several hundred years now.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because I think Melian set up the girdle before Morgoth had really come to his full strength.
Yes. I can't remember what I was going to say. Sorry. Yes.
No, that's all right. So with that, let's move on to the next chapter of Tuor and the Fall of Gondolin.
Can we just, before we move on,
can
I touch on this little bit about the origin of the Fall of Doriath tale?
Yeah.
It's really quite fascinating. So, when I first read the Silmarillion, going back many years now, it always seemed seamless to me, absolutely seamless, just the way it's put together. And I never really read the history of Middle Earth that much until 4 or 5 years ago. I would read the Book of Lost Tales, which has the original stories that Tolkien wrote during his war years. But I'd never delved into the latter books much. Now, the latter books has a discussion by Chris Tolkien about what he did in terms of this chapter 22 of the Ruin of Doriath. And he treated it much, much differently to the other chapters, because there was a paucity of material when it came to the Quenta.
Right. You were talking about this earlier.
So I was talking to you earlier, it is much more an editorialization, where he worked with Guy Gavriel Kay to create details, because there was very little to work with. I'll just read a little.
Yeah.
Because it explains it much more clearly than my rambling. Chris writes, in the story that appears in the Silmarillion, the outlaws who went with Hurin to Nergothrond were removed, as also was the curse of Mim, and the only treasure that Hurin took from Nergothrond was the Nauglamir, which was here supposed to have been made by the dwarves for Finrod Vilagund, and to have been the most prized by him of all the horde of Nergothrond. Huron was represented as being at last freed from the delusions inspired by Morgoth in his encounter with Melian in Menegroth. The dwarves who set Silmaril in the Norglemere were already in Menegroth engaged on other works, and it was they who slew Thingol. At that time, Melian's power was withdrawn from Neldorith and Region, and she vanished out of Middle-earth, leaving Doriath unprotected. The ambush and destruction of the dwarves at Sarn Athrad was given again to Beren and the Green Elves, following my father's letter of 1963, quoted on page 353. However, he said that Beren had no army. And from the same source, the Ents, shepherds of the trees, were introduced.
Oh, right, yeah, I forgot to mention that. They were a part of that battle.
They were, yes, but they don't appear in the Tale of Years that Tolkien put together, which is about 4 paragraphs, and they're not within the Book of Lost Tales story either.
Okay.
This story was not lightly or easily conceived, but was the outcome of long experimentation among alternative conceptions. In this work, Guy Kay took a major part, and the chapter that I finally wrote owes much to my discussions with him. It is and was obvious that a step was being taken of a different order from any other manipulation of my father's own writing in the course of the book. Even in the case of the story of the fall of Gondolin, to which my father had never returned, something could be contrived without reducing radical changes in the narrative. It seemed at that time that there were elements inherent in the story of the ruin of Doriath as it stood that were radically incompatible with the Silmarillion as projected, and that there was here an inescapable choice, either to abandon that conception or else to alter the story. I think now that this was a mistaken view, and that the undoubted difficulties could have been and should have been surmounted without so far overstepping the bounds of editorial function. He's mostly referring there to the fact that Huron originally was supposed to bring a hoard of gold, and originally Thingol, then Tinwillant, was much poorer, a woodland king, much more in the vein of the elven king of Mirkwood that we see in The Hobbit.
Okay, interesting.
And there was a curse. Mims put a curse upon the gold, and then there's the fact that there was no girdle, which made it easy for the dwarves to come in and kill Thingol, and then ruin the realm. All these are different, and especially the girdle of Melian creates a very large problem.
That's a wildly different version of it.
Yeah,
and I would agree with Christopher Tolkien that in the wider scope of the Silmarillion, with that story written like that, it doesn't really fit.
No, it just would not fit. It said, I'm just going to read another note of Tolkien's. Doriath cannot be entered by a hostile army. Somehow it must be contrived that Thingol is lured outside or induced to go to war beyond his borders, and is there slain by the dwarves. Then Melian departs, and the girdle being removed, Doriath is ravaged by the dwarves. So Tolkien was aware of this. He just did not have time to address it.
Right.
But
so Tolkien wanted to change this so that it fit into the Silmarillion better. He just never got around to it.
Never got around to it.
Okay. Well, but in that case, I feel like I think it works really well, and I think that Christopher was being a little too hard on himself by saying that he sort of regrets having to take this extra editorial step.
Chris seems to have got more into an editorial role as he's gotten older. I get an academic role, where he's more into writing commentaries and less into what we see in the Silmarillion, which is a whole compilation.
Yeah. Because, it's like all of this is just sort of a compilation of lots of stories, and I guess up until this point I sort of thought that Christopher Tolkien acted more as a curator of this, and didn't do too many editorial changes to it, but I mean, clearly he did.
Yes, in this one, there's details created out of whole cloth.
Hmm.
Um, I like it. I
Yeah,
think
I like it
well,
too. I think
it's
it
really
fits very well. I think it fits perfectly. And and I also feel that um, Christopher was doing what Tolkien himself probably would have done eventually as well.
mm, um, it is. It's also within the terms of the will. I think it says that that Chris, as literary executor, has had the power to adapt, create, destroy, and I think that's quoting verbatim.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So he could have just burned it all if he wanted to.
Well, I'm really glad
Within
he
the
didn't
term,
do that.
yeah. But yeah, that's an interesting part of the tale of Doriath. It's really quite different from all the others in terms of how it was put together. And if people want to find out the original story, they should head to the Book of Lost Tales
Yeah.
and read the tale of the Norglafring.
Okay.
It's very quite different.
I definitely want to check that out. I do have a Book of Lost Tales, and I've only read little bits of it, but I sort of feel like it would have been more confusing to me than anything else had I not gone through the Silmarillion as deeply as I have this time as sort of like a primer.
Mm.
I don't know. We'll see. Because like I do plan on reading and checking out Unfinished Tales and Book of Lost Tales and all that stuff now with the Silmarillion uh, much more explained to myself in my own head.
Unfinished Tales is an easier read than History of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
But I think of the History of Middle Earth, those ones in the Book of Lost Tales, they're probably the nicest reads.
Okay.
The further you get in, the more notated it tends to become, and it can
Mm-hmm.
be very difficult to wade through alternatives. But yeah,
Okay.
that's always my suggestion to people.
Okay. Well, that's a good suggestion. I'll take that in. I'll take that under consideration. I mean, first and foremost, got to finish the Silmarillion.
Of course, yes. Yeah, speaking of which, we probably should press on.
Yes, we should. Let's move on to Tuor and the fall of Gondolin. So we're actually going to go way back in time now to a young Tuor who is actually Turin's cousin. Um, Now there was a brief mention at the start of the story of Turin, which I realize is 2-3 weeks ago at this point. Um, um, we have a story of Tuor being taken by his mother to the Grey Elves of Mithrim. I believe that's it. Mithrim, yes. And raised by them, while his mother, Rion, goes out to the giant pile of dead bodies after the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears and succumbs to her own grief because his father, her husband, Huor, died in that battle. And so with that, Tuor is then raised by the Grey Elves in an area that is being overrun by Easterlings. And Hervandi's asking, why must the best of the elven cities fall? Why? Because if they don't, it would be boring.
I was going to make a comment about entropy.
Okay.
Never mind, I was being too clever by half.
Okay. With going back to Tuor, he's raised by these elves, and eventually they he's captured by the Easterlings and made a slave for several years until he finally escapes and goes into these caves, and I have to remember the name of the caves. I think it begins with an A. The caves of Androth. uh, which is sort of like this underground network, and he lives as a fugitive down there until he's given a very special call.
Similar to Baron.
Yeah, yeah, similar to
Baron
Baron.
lived alone. Baron was an outlaw. Baron then felt that he needed to move south
Mm-hmm.
and was drawn south to Doriath.
Yeah, but I think
Um,
I think in this, like, we have well, in this one in particular, we know who is calling him and why and what the call is about. And
yeah, it
he,
says almost set in his heart to depart from the land of his fathers. I wonder how Ulmo found him.
I don't know. Like,
No, it doesn't say.
I'm assuming
Interesting.
I'm assuming because Ulmo is Lord of Waters that maybe he found him when he was living with the elves in Mithrim, because Mithrim has a giant lake.
Possibly.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm spitballing here.
Yeah.
It's never really said.
Maybe
Like,
maybe there was a river nearby.
maybe that
Ulmo's
could be.
power does extend up the rivers.
Hmm. And so anyway, Tuor is given this special pull by Ulmo to head south,
Mm-hmm.
and so with that, he eventually comes to an old city, an old abandoned elf city called Vinyamar,
And
which
he does so unmarked by any of Morgoth's spies or minions.
right, because he's been traveling underground.
Yes, and nobody in general escapes from Hithlum being unmarked.
Right,
It's a watched realm.
right, right. So he's already kind of done the impossible, getting out of Hithlum completely unnoticed. And so he comes to this ruined city of Vinyamar, which used to be the capital that was led by Turgon, before he got the idea in his head that he wanted to build Gondolin. And so when Turgon was building Gondolin, he he would he was slowly and secretly moving all of his people from Vinyamar into Gondolin, but he was given special instructions by Ulmo to leave a set of armor and weapons behind for a very specific person who would one day be his deliverance. And so Turgon obeyed Ulmo and left the armor there in Vinyamar. And now Tuor has come to Vinyamar, and he goes in and he sees it, and he adorns himself in this elven armor, and he comes
And guess
out.
what? It fits.
Yeah, like, it's almost like he knew.
Yes.
And so Tuor comes out adorned in this armor, and it's there that he goes out to the sea and for the first time meets Ulmo face to face. And Ulmo comes out of the water and tells him that he needs to go to Gondolin, and he needs to convince Turgon to evacuate Gondolin because Ulmo no longer has the same power of protection he once had, which was the same message that he gave to Nargothrond, which Thorin flat out ignored, and that ended poorly. And so Tuor takes the armor. He doesn't really know where Gondolin is. His father was there, but he never really talked about it. And, well, Huor was killed before he was born, so it didn't matter anyway.
Also, Hua didn't know
Yeah.
precisely.
No, he didn't know precisely where it was, and neither did Horin really.
No.
He kind of had like a vague idea, but that's about it. But
And
because of their oath, they never told anybody.
mm. And the way they got there, they were
Hmm.
carried in
They were
on
carried
eagles,
by eagles,
carried
yeah.
back on eagles.
And so after Tuor has his meeting with Ulmo, he goes back into Vinyamar and finds an elf sitting by a wall, and that elf is named Voronway, who is another character who has been uh, aided by Ulmo, because he was an elf of Gondolin, who was uh, who was commanded by Turgon to take a ship and try to go out west to Valinor and to try to get the help of the Valar. And they they encountered a storm, and Voronway was the sole survivor, and he was spared specifically by Ulmo. Like Ulmo actually picked him up and dropped him off in Vinyamar. Oh God! In the chat, they're talking about Middle Earth potty humor, and it's just getting worse and worse. Okay, so so Tuor and Voronway meet, and Voronway knows about the prophecy of Gondolin's savior being the one who is bestowed with this special armor. And so, without hesitation, he agrees to lead Tuor to Gondolin. And very, very easily and very handily, they make it there. And they when they get in, Tuor greets them, and he sees that, Turgon greets them, and sees that Tuor is wearing the special armor that he has left behind, and so he knows that Tuor is a messenger from Ulmo, and so he welcomes him, and he listens to the message, and the message is, you have to leave Gondolin because you will be destroyed otherwise. And again, we have this same level of hubris that we saw with Thingol, where Turgon believes that he has fortified himself so strongly that there is no way Morgoth could possibly get in. And so he says, we're not going to worry about it, because after the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Turgon retreated back into Gondolin and basically made the kingdom even more isolationist than it already was. They didn't get involved in anything. They never left their borders. He created new laws that nobody could leave their borders. And so, what is going on here in the chat? Okay. So, but Turgon also respects that Tuor is a messenger from the Valar, and so he welcomes him with open arms. And Tuor is very taken with this, and he sees the lords of Gondolin, and I believe it says sitting to Turgon's right was his sister son Maeglin, and to his left was his daughter Idril. And Tuor and Idril quickly fall in love. Yeah, I'm kind of going through this rather fast. they fall in love, and this is very, very dismaying to Maeglin, who we talked about many chapters ago. Um, he is he's the son of Turgon's sister Erethel and the dark elf Aeol, and Maeglin also has a bit of darkness in himself, and he also has a desire for Idril, but neither Turgon nor Idril would consent to a marriage because Idril and Maeglin are too close in relation, and Idril just didn't love him that way.
Kissing cousins not allowed in Gondolin.
Yeah, exactly. So eventually,
Again, more problems caused by the pursuit of shiny things.
yes, because it's mentioned in this chapter that Maeglin kind of desired Idril more because of her station than because he loved her. Like he more desired her because she was the daughter of a lord of Gondolin.
Which is strange because he's a Lord of Gondolin anyway.
Yeah, like he's
Maybe it indicates some sort of insecurity within his character.
maybe because like I mean technically he's like next in the line of succession after Turgon.
Yes. Well, yes.
At least as far as Gondolin goes. But
Assuming they don't do ruling queens.
right, which I don't believe they do. They may
I
have.
don't think so.
They may have at some point later on, but that's kind of debatable. So Maeglin is dismayed by this, and he takes to brooding, which is one of the things he loves to do. And Tuor and Idril eventually do get married. And so and now Idril is also she's also heard Tuor's message, and she's sort of hedging her bets that maybe Tuor is right, and so she's been very secretly creating an escape route out of Gondolin. And she hasn't told Turgon about it. She hasn't told anybody about it. Just in case something should happen.
Something else we should touch on very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Said Turgon did not refuse him even the hand of his daughter, for though he would not heed the bidding of Ulmo, he perceived that the fate of the Noldor was wound with the one whom Ulmo had sent, and he did not forget the words that Hewr spoke to him before the host of Gondolin departed from the Battle of Unknown Tears. So, Turgon still has great insight.
Mm-hmm.
He's able to perceive things. He's just unable to overcome his love of the creation that he's made.
Yeah, like he has a very and I totally understand this because like he's put his heart and his soul for centuries into building Gondolin into this beautiful city that is also a tribute to the elven city of Tirion back in Valinor, and this city means a lot to him, and like I can understand like even with the Valar saying you need to leave, it just means too much to him, and so I can understand that, and I wouldn't call it hubris so much as I would call it just attachment.
He's trying to save the house even as it's burning down around him, when instead he should just be trying to save his ass. Right.
And that's kind of exactly what happens.
It is kind of exactly what happens.
So after a little while, Maeglin is doing one of his broody things. One of the things he likes to do is he likes to go into the mines because that's kind of his stock in trade. He's a miner and a smith, and he's been secretly and against Turgon's wishes sneaking out of Gondolin. And wouldn't you know it, at some point he gets picked up by orcs. And oh, I see Ava has joined the chat. Hello, Ava. Oh, she's been here the whole time. She's just been listening in the background. Okay. So Meglin gets picked up by the orcs, and he's dragged all the way back to Angband, where he is interrogated by... Come on, you stupid mouse. Okay. He is interrogated by Morgoth.
And you'd think that'd take a while and maybe somebody would notice.
But, apparently not, because nobody does. And in fact, Meglin, who really doesn't feel that much loyalty to Turgon or to Gondolin, very, very quickly brokers a deal with Morgoth. And Morgoth promises Meglin that he will be the Lord of Gondolin and he will have Idril as his wife if he will show them the location. And so Meglin shows Morgoth where Gondolin is. This is the greatest victory that Morgoth has had in a long time because he's been obsessively searching for Gondolin for ages.
It does say that Meglin was threatened with torture, though, as well.
He was threatened with torture, but it seemed more like he was
I mean, he still has bad things in his heart, but he was threatened with torture. I will give him that much.
He was threatened with torture, but it also... he also says that he wasn't a coward or a craven. But
he's no Huron.
Right. He's no Huron. He's not going to stand up to Morgoth.
He's not going to get chained to a chair for 50 years or whatever.
Right. But I also feel like he was more easily willing to work with Morgoth and tell him what he wanted because he never really felt any real loyalty to Turgon or to Gondolin.
I think in the Book of Lost Tales version, he actually surrenders the information really, really, really easily. So, even easily, he's not even threatened with torture, I don't think.
Really? Not even with torture?
No.
That's interesting. So yeah, Meglin, and then because Meglin is working with Morgoth releases him so that he can go back to Gondolin before anybody knows he's gone. Which, like you said, you would think at this point somebody would have noticed.
Yeah.
But apparently not.
To get to Angband, I mean, it's 120 leagues or something, isn't it?
Something like that, yeah. Angband is not close to Gondolin.
Not. But regardless, someone knows where it is now.
Yeah. So Morgoth now musters all of his forces to get ready for an assault on Gondolin. And Meglin comes back and everybody's like, "Oh, hey Meglin, how you doing, buddy?" And now, like I said, Idril has sort of been anticipating something is probably going to happen, so she's been building these secret escape tunnels. And it should also be noted that in this time, enough time has passed for Tuor and Idril to have a child. And that child is Arundel, who I don't really have a picture of, but Arundel is a very important character who we will learn more about next week. With the return of Meglin, eventually on a day of festival, kind of like when Morgoth and Ungoliant killed the trees of the Valar. Morgoth stages his attack on Gondolin at a time of festival when everybody is welcoming. I think it's the first sun, the first sunlight of the summer or something like that.
The feast is called the Gates of Summer.
Yes, the Gates of Summer. And he says the glow came from the north and not from the east, and that's because the glow in the north was everything Morgoth had at his disposal descending on Gondolin. There were orcs, dragons, demons, balrogs, werewolves, everything. They all smash through and begin an all-out assault on Gondolin, and this is where suddenly the Silmarillion becomes unbelievably vague.
There's a reason for this.
Yeah. Give me, what is the reason for this?
Basically, the reason is Tolkien never revisited the battle after he wrote the original during the war. So the original is written in a highly archaic language, and it also has differing details. Again, similar to the Doriath tale.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the dragons that you mentioned in the Book of Lost Tales, Fall of Gondolin, they're way closer to being tanks. They're made of metal. They're driven by fire. They pour fire forth from within, and they open up and they disgorge battalions of orcs.
Wow.
Balrogs are much more numerous and much more easily slain.
Mm-hmm.
They're just two of the more salient differences.
Interesting.
Yeah, but at the Fall of Gondolin, as it is in the Book of Lost Tales, runs to about 60 or 70 pages, as opposed to around about 8 pages in the Silmarillion on my first edition.
Yeah, and I think it's even fewer pages in this because it's a small type on big pages. I think the entire chapter of the Fall of Gondolin is like 5 pages. Yeah,
that is pretty short.
Yeah, it's really short. And that isn't to say that there are no details in the Silmarillion. There are a couple things that are described. Two of which are stories surrounding Torgon's 2 chief lieutenants, Ecthelion and Glorfindel. Characters you may recognize, or names you may recognize from The Lord of the Rings.
Ecthelion is the father of Denethor, of course. Ecthelion 2.
Yep. So in this one, Ecthelion, he fights Gothmog, the leader of the Balrogs, and no real details about it in the Silmarillion except for they are both killed in this fight.
Yes, which is a detail that carries across from the Book of Lost Tales as well.
Okay, cool.
So they both do each other to death in both stories.
Okay. Which just hearing that line says, okay, this was an epic throwdown. Because
yes,
because Gothmog has done so much damage over the years. And so
he slew Fingon, he slew Fëanor. They're the main his main wins, I guess. I can't remember
those are his main wins. Yeah, he killed Fëanor, he killed Fingon. He captured Hurin and basically dragged him to Angband. Like when Gothmog shows up, bad stuff's gonna happen. And so I kind of imagine a battle between him and Ecthelion is just utterly epic and destructive, and it's like 2 superheroes going against each other.
So, would you like me to read then?
Yeah.
Okay, well here's a little excerpt from the Fall of Gondolin as written in the second book of Lost Tales.
Okay.
And I will read the death of Ectelion as Tolkien wrote it in 1916.
Okay.
Okay, so there he referring to Tuor in this case, became weary from the strangling heat and was beaten down by a great demon, even Gothmog, lord of the Balrogs, son of Melko. But lo, Ectelion, whose face was of the pallor of grey steel, and whose shield arm hung limp at his side, strode about him as he fell. And that gnome drave at the demon, yet did not give him his death, rather getting a wound to his sword arm that his weapon left his grasp. Then leapt Ectelion, lord of the fountain, the fairest of the Noldoli, full at Gothmog, even as he raised his whip, and his helm that had a spike upon it he drave into that evil breast, and he twined his legs about his foeman's thighs, and the Balrog yelled and fell forward, but those two dropped into the basin of the king's fountain, which was very deep. There that creature found his bane, and Ectelion sank steel-laden into the depths, and so perished the lord of the fountain after that fiery battle in cool waters.
Wow.
And that's it.
That's intense.
The writing is fantastic. It's very, very vivid. It's one of the tales that I return to within History of Middle Earth most often because it's just a thrill to read.
That sounds amazing. I need to read that for sure. So that's one of
yes.
That's one of the fights. Another
That's
one.
one of the fights, and there are other captains of Turgon that are not mentioned within the Silmarillion that are also there. Who, if Tolkien revised the tale, may or may not have survived. Who the hell knows? What may or may not have made the cut eventually. But there's a lot more detail there for people to go into if they want to read about the actual fall of Gondolin. But you have to be aware that there are differences. It's not quite the same Gondolin.
Because moving on from that one, another story in the battle that gets a very brief mention, and I sort of feel like should be talked about more, is the death of Turgon.
Yes,
because he's fighting in his tower, and it's torn down with him in it. At least that's what I can get.
He refuses to leave, and then Tuor takes the remnant people, and they make their way to the way of escape and start going out through the tunnel. And from a distance, they can see the Turgon, and there's dragons wrapping themselves around the tower, and then it's crushed and falls over. And as it falls, I think Turgon says something like, "Great is the fall of Gondolin," and everybody shuddered. It's extraordinary, vivid writing.
Yeah.
So that's another place where there's more detail. But yeah, Turgon dies with his city, as he wanted.
Yeah, I guess. And then one more is the final throwdown between Tuor and Maeglin, which I thought was just a beautifully dramatic scene, because like this is two of them. Maeglin is trying to stop Tuor's escape, and Tuor and Maeglin have a big duel up on the top walls of Gondolin, and where is it? No, that's too far. Tuor sought to rescue Idril from the sack of the city, but Maeglin laid hands on her and on Arundel, and Tuor fought with Maeglin on the walls and cast him far out, and his body fell as it smote the rocky slopes of Amangwara thrice, ere it pitched into the flames below. So, like, this is just I just imagine this to be like just an incredibly intense duel between the two of them, ending with Tuor just throwing Maeglin off of the wall and like I can see it visually and cinematically in my head.
I think Maglin wanted his prize.
Yeah,
That's obviously what he was after.
right, right, of course. And so like this is sort of like a fitting end to Meglin, and like it's one of those things like where you could just like see that happening in a movie theater, and everybody in the theater just loses their minds cheering.
Which makes me a bit sad for that mob. There was a French mob that was going to put together a cinematic version to go online or something like that. And they storm over Gondolin, they called it, and then Tolkien Estate squashed it.
Really?
So, yeah.
Oh, it's such
That
a
was-
bummer.
Last year, I think, maybe the year before, they started thinking about it, and they put out some rough designs and stuff like that on the internet. They had a website and everything, and
Mm-hmm.
and they were like, "Oh, it's not for profit and stuff," and then Tolkien Estate squashed them like an ant.
Yeah, Tolkien Estate is really, really intense about adaptations.
Protective, but
Yeah.
yeah, by the same token, we have stuff like uh, Hunt for Gollum
Mhm.
and what's the other one? I can't remember it.
Born of Hope.
That's it.
Yeah.
I watched that. I quite liked it.
I started watching Born of Hope. I haven't gotten all the way through it, but I liked it. I thought it was very well made. But yeah, I sort of feel like the
$20,000. They did it for $20,000.
That's amazing.
That was amazing.
But I think the Tolkien Estate probably gives them a little bit more leeway because they're not doing a direct adaptation.
Possibly. Also, there's the fact that the rights for that probably mostly reside with New Line, and I think at that point New Line was very amenable and happy for them to do that.
Yeah.
Whether one could get away with that with Warner's now these days.
Probably not as likely, but
Yeah.
we're going off on a tangent now at this point.
Yeah, sorry. That was
No,
my bad.
that's fine. That's fine. It's interesting, and it's kind of sad to know that somebody tried to do that and it got shut down. Because I mean, there's like this battle is so utterly epic. Like it's hard not to visualize it cinematically in your head.
Especially
And
when
Aravandi's
it's-
making a good point. She's saying, so Meglin got thrown over a wall just like his father.
He did.
That's very true. And you know what? Until this moment, Aravandi, I didn't make that connection. Well done. So we've got
If
Ecthelion.
you think Turgon's dead and the Chua and
Yeah.
by Idril as king consort now, then you could argue that he was executing king's justice.
Yeah. This is true.
And
Except
the king's justice was the same. I mean, that the traditional way of disposing of people was to throw them over the rock.
that's true.
So,
And yeah, like I could sort of see that happening. But anyway, like after he's killed Meglin, they get their people together, and they begin making their way out of Gondolin. They begin trying to escape, and that's when they are waylaid by another Balrog, and that's when the other Chief Lieutenant Glorfindel comes and defends the escapees from the Balrog on this very tight precipice of a road. And basically what happens is Glorfindel and the Balrog, they fight and eventually both fall off of the mountainside together.
which is a I guess trend. If you want to take down a Balrog, you're gonna have to probably by yourself.
Yeah,
Gandalf
that's
does it. Glorfindel does it. Ectelion does it.
Gandalf does it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like
Yeah.
Everybody who fights a Balrog, if you're gonna kill a Balrog, like it eventually winds up with you and the Balrog falling to your doom.
That's assuming you get that far.
Yeah. But in this, Glorfindel and the Balrog are killed. But Glorfindel is an interesting and unique situation because he's killed. His spirit goes to Valinor, to the halls of Mandos, but he's eventually granted permission to return to Middle Earth and in his body. And so
he's reincarnated.
Yeah, is he reincarnated or does he? I guess he is.
It's reincarnation.
Yeah, so it's not his old body; it's a new body.
It's the same body.
Okay.
But a new body.
Okay, gotcha. But he's granted permission to return to Middle Earth, which is why we see him in the Lord of the Rings, and he participates in the Council of Elrond. Just in the book. I don't think he's in the movie.
No, he was sent back to protect Frodo.
Right. Okay.
That's his big mission.
Okay.
Yeah. So when he helps Frodo, that seems to be
that's his purpose.
That's his purpose.
Okay.
So yeah.
But in this, he's able to help Tuor and Idril and Arundel and everybody escape out of Gondolin, and
the other thing to note, I think, is just how powerful he is. He's able to kill a Balrog.
Yeah.
And he dies in the process, but like even Fëanor is unable to do that.
Yeah.
And Fingorn are unable to do that, and they're both very, very powerful elves.
Yeah.
So that says something about his nature.
To be fair to Fëanor and Fingon, neither of them were killed by the Balrog single-handedly.
No, and they probably weren't in good shape by then.
Yeah. Like in both instances, Gothmog had to have somebody else come in and kind of sucker punch them.
Yes.
So Tuor and Idril, Arundel, and a bunch of refugees, they're able to escape from Gondolin as it goes up in flames and is completely ruined. And they also make their way to the havens of Sirion.
The Book of Lost Tales says about 800 survivors.
800 survivors, okay.
Yeah.
It's not a great number, but it's not a terrible number either.
Well, you'd think it'd be a city of many thousands, so that's a whole lot of elves that got crispy fried.
Yes, this is true. And I mean, it is the entire city that just went up in flames. So that's the destruction of the last two kingdoms of the elves, and now all that's left are the scattered green elves in Sirion, and everybody else has pretty much become a refugee in the havens of Sirion, and they now are with Círdan, the shipwright.
And the Sons of Fëanor, wherever they are.
And the Sons of Fëanor are like they're sort of off in the wild still. But don't worry, they're coming back. And it also should be noted here that Turgon was the last High King of the Noldor. Well, I shouldn't say the last, but he was the High King of the Noldor up until he got killed. And so the birthright of being the High King actually doesn't stay in Turgon's family. It goes back to Fingolfin's family, who was the original High King. And his son Fingon sent his son down to Sirion. And so his son has been living rather safe and protected all these years, and now he's going to take up the mantle of High King of the Noldor, and his name is Gil-galad. And Gil-galad is going to hang on to that title of High King of the Noldor all the way up to the Third Age. When he finally dies in the Battle of the Last Alliance against Sauron, which is you can see him in the opening of Fellowship of the Ring. So he makes it quite far.
And that's kind of the fault of, again, one of the sons of Fëanor who got into making rings and things.
Yep.
So yes,
it always comes back to the sons of Fëanor.
They're making trouble.
Yeah, but that's a story for another episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now we have Tuor and Idril and their son Arundel in the Havens of Sirion, along with Elwing and the remnants of Doriath, and so they've come together to sort of create a new refugee society. And eventually, like, we sort of skip ahead into the future a little bit with Tuor and Idril, and they've lived a good long life, and eventually Tuor's yearning for the sea grows so strong. It says, "In those days Tuor felt old age creep upon him, and ever a longing for the deeps of the sea grew stronger in his heart. Therefore he built a great ship and named it, oh god, Earame, which is Sea Wing. And with Idril Celebrimbor he set sail on the sunset and the west, and came no more into any tale or song. But in after days it was sung that Tuor alone of mortal men was numbered among the elder race, and was joined with the Noldor, whom he loved, and his fate is sundered from the fate of men." So Tuor and Idril actually do kind of get a little bit of a happy ending. Yes, their home has been destroyed, but they're able to rebuild, and they're able to live a good long life and eventually leave. And sort of leave by their own means.
That ending sounds like some sort of oral tradition.
Yeah. And there's
you understand what I mean?
Yeah. And there's a lot of that in this. Like you'll hear a lot. You'll hear a lot of, like, he'll say, and that person enters this tale no more. Like he says that about Melian when she leaves Doriath. He says that about Morwen when she runs off, and we don't see her again until she meets
same
Hurin.
about Hurin himself.
Yeah,
it said he threw himself in the Western Sea.
Mm-hmm. And like that's and that sort of falls into and I don't remember if Tolkien said this specifically, but I always saw the Silmarillion as sort of like you said, like an oral tradition, like an Elvish oral history.
Well, for many years, elves did not actually write.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't write down their histories.
Right.
They just passed them on orally. This is talked about within the history of Middle Earth, and thus, when a whole lot of elves got squished by Morgoth, a lot of that knowledge was lost, and then they started compiling it through a number of sages. And
the same thing with way back with the Battle of the Powers, when the Valar first fight against Morgoth, and the elves aren't even present there. They see it from way off from afar in Cuiviénen, and all they see is just a giant storm.
My impression is that the Silmarillion is kind of a bit like Bilbo's Tales of Elvish.
Okay.
It's Bilbo's translation almost.
Okay.
That's
interesting.
Whether you want to accept that or not, that's up to you. That's my headcanon.
That's an interesting take on it. Like I don't dislike that idea. I can imagine there would probably be many Tolkien fans who would. But that's an interesting take on it.
But he did go to Rivendell to research, and he would have had the closest thing to a primary source there. Elrond.
That's very true.
So I don't know. It's possible.
It's certainly possible, and like I don't think that's an unreasonable way of looking at it at all. Kind of like the same way I think it was Keeley, Torn Staffer Keeley, wrote an article about how the Red Book of Westmarch is really more of Bilbo's embellishment of what happened, and so what we're seeing in the movies, as crazy as it is just from Bilbo's uh, imagination, which is also removed 60 years from everything that happened.
I think in the narrator of The Hobbit, whoever it is not entirely reliable all of the time.
Yeah.
And that could be said to come through into the start of the Fellowship of the Ring. Think of the talking fox, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly how far you want to take that unreliable narrated thing is up to you. But I think The Hobbit in particular, one way to look at it is that whoever's telling the story loves to make stuff up.
Yeah.
So there's a fair degree of embellishment going on.
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
Which, I mean, makes total sense. Like, I mean, like when you look at it, like in the grand combined universe between that and the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion,
Tonally, they're so different.
yeah, they're very tonally different, and I mean, when I sort of like to take a step back and look at it from Tolkien's perspective, which was originally The Hobbit was not going to be a part of any of this at all. Like this was just a goofy story he was writing for his kids.
Yeah, then it started worming its way in.
Mm-hmm. And he started rewriting bits of The Hobbit to better fit into the Lord of the Rings, and he started changing Lord of the Rings to fit better in with the Silmarillion, and changing the Silmarillion to sort of tie itself to the Lord of the Rings better. And so like it was very much like this very complicated set of retconning that he was doing.
Mm.
And with anything, like I sort of feel like he probably never completed it to his satisfaction. I think he got very close.
It's a bit like Leaf by Niggle, if you've ever read that.
I haven't read Leaf by Niggle, no.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's always more to paint.
Mm-hmm. And I think like any writer will tell you that, like you never finish a book, you stop a book.
Or it stops you.
Yeah.
I'm a writer, I know that feeling.
Oh yeah, oh me too. You right there?
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, where are we?
I think we're pretty much done. Like, I think we've gotten through the main bulk of it now. Because where we go from here is the story of Arendelle and the War of Wrath, which is the big climax.
And another hugely abbreviated chapter.
Yes, very much so. And again, like sort of like I don't want to spoil too much because we're going to get into it next week, but it's kind of the same thing that we had with the Battle of the Powers, way back, which is the Elves, for the most part, when it comes to a giant battle between the Valar, the Elves aren't really a part of it. So everything is told almost by hearsay. Like, it's sort of told from the perspective of somebody who's watching it from a very large distance away.
Side stage.
Yeah. But, I mean, there are still major things that happen, well,
the Silmarils, for starters.
Well, yeah, the Silmarils, for sure.
Those little gem things that everybody's been chasing after for 500 years.
And we do get a resolution with what happens with the Silmarils and what happens with the remaining Sons of Feanor. Spoiler alert, it's not happy. And also what happens with Arendelle, which is probably one of the most fascinating stories in this whole book to me. Because it's so unique, and like you sort of really get the sense of like everything has been building up to this moment.
Well, yeah, the Arendelle tale was meant to be quite large.
Yeah.
As Tolkien outlined it, it would have probably been Silmarillion in scope in itself.
Okay. Wow.
But he never got past sketching it. He like sketched, oh, there's going to be 7 parts to it. This will happen first part. This will happen. Blah 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 blah.
Oh
And
wow, that is a lot.
that's far as got.
Wow.
Mm.
Okay. But I mean, you can definitely like see. I mean, I don't want to get too into it, but you can definitely see like the large scope of the story of Arendelle in this chapter, and like I said, there's a very strong sense of everything has been building to this moment.
Yes.
Um, and it should be mentioned. Like one thing I forgot to mention is that we do have a scene at the end of this chapter where Ulmo goes back to the Valar and basically is pleading with them, like, you need to step in here. The elves have been driven back so far, they're almost utterly destroyed. And Manwë says to him, we can't do anything until one of them is able to make it to us to plead for a case on behalf of both elves and men. So we sort of leave it with that. Like, I imagine Ulmo is like probably smashing his head against a wall at this point.
Ulmo is probably the smartest of the Valar in that regard. He keeps, I guess, faith with Eru the best.
Yeah. Well,
and he's willing to work against Morgoth as much as he can.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is that Ulmo is the only Valar who actually is in Middle Earth during all of this.
Mm.
Like, I mean, I think Orome came back at some point, but I could be wrong. But, I mean, it's mostly Ulmo. Ulmo was the one who influenced Finrod and Turgon to build their secret kingdoms. He's the one who inspired Tuor to go to Vinyamar and to be his herald. Mm. He's the one who's been laying down protection against everybody, like Hurin and Huor. He lays down a fog so that they can escape and get taken up by eagles.
Without Ulmo, the elves would be much worse off.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, like Ulmo is the only one of the Valar who's actually like participating in the day-to-day of Middle Earth.
And I think that just shows you how hopelessly outmatched the elves were in even thinking that they could fight a Valar and win. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts that Feanor would even think that. But I mean, there also is like that level of hubris and arrogance that we see, like even when a Valar comes to them and says, "Listen, you need to leave. You will not be able to defeat what's coming." In both cases, with Turin and with Turgon, they're both like, "We can totally beat them. I don't know what you're talking about."
And Thingol rejects Melion's advice too.
Yeah.
And enmeshes himself with the doom of the sons of Feanor, and thus Doriath falls.
Yeah.
This is
and
what
all because he wanted to give Baron an impossible task.
Yes. What happens when you don't listen to your very wise advisors?
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of like that's always been the biggest failing of the elves, is this very this almost self-destructive level of confidence. And so that's why, like, I sort of feel like when we see the elves like Galadriel in Lord of the Rings, they're very sedate and they're very repentant and they're very closed away from the rest of the world, and it's because they've gone through so much and they've seen just what their arrogance can bring about.
Yeah, that's what an extra 6,000 years will do to you.
Yeah, exactly.
You get, especially if you've survived that. You gone, nah, maybe not.
Yeah,
That
and
thing about going up against Sauron, somebody else can do it.
which is why, like, I always felt that Galadriel's scene in Fellowship, when Frodo offers her the ring and she gives the whole speech, in place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen and all that. I always felt that um, that scene for her was basically her, in her own sort of, I guess, mocking sort of way, telling Frodo, listen, I've been down this road 1,000 times before. I've seen what this can do. And because I think in the movie it's depicted almost like she's struggling with the decision, and I've always felt that Galadriel has already made that decision. She knows that she's not going to be a part of this.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, that's possible.
But yeah, like that's my interpretation of it, and like, I mean, I don't have a problem with how it was depicted in the movie. It's not particularly how I would have done it. Like, I actually kind of felt like the way it's portrayed in the Ralph Bakshi movie is a little bit more like how I would have done it, because like she gives him this speech, and then she sort of knowingly giggles at the end, like, "Oh, you hobbit, you really don't know what you're talking about."
Well, she's certainly seen it in others,
Yeah,
and she had that desire herself, when that's why she left Valinor,
yeah.
and that's why she stayed. Well, in part.
Well, in part, I mean, also in part was love of Celeborn.
Yeah, but she desired to have places to rule. She had a hand in Eregion, and she helped establish Lorien. So she has had command and control, and she was even instrumental in establishing the White Council. So
Yeah.
she certainly has no desire, I think, to stop being a mover and shaker, but she recognises that there's limits.
Yeah. And now
And that's
Eravani's
different.
bringing up an interesting point, which is, didn't Galadriel's rejection of the ring actually redeem her from the doom of the Noldor, so that she was able to go back to Valinor? I sort of feel like that was probably part of it, but there were a lot of other actions that that sort of helped to alleviate the doom of the Noldor, because now correct me if I'm wrong, because this is the next chapter, but I believe like after the War of Wrath and after Arundel's plea, the Valar actually pardoned the Noldor. Or
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
The ban was lifted, but
Yeah.
I don't know. But according to some interpretations, the ban was never totally lifted on Galadriel. For I'm not quite sure why.
I
As
wouldn't
mentioned,
I wouldn't figure why it would be lifted on like people like the Sons of Feanor, but not her,
yeah, I
because
don't know either.
she's a
but-
daughter of Finarfin. She's like as she's as little a part of this as you could possibly get.
You'll have to start looking at Unfinished Tales if you want to look into that one.
Okay.
Like I said, that's a really complex book.
Okay. All right.
When it comes to the history of Galadriel and Celeborn, it's it's a mess.
Interesting.
It offers a number of different interpretations, and one of those is that she was still banned.
Interesting.
Mm.
Huh. I'm gonna have to check that out, because yeah, I would imagine that once they're pardoned, that would definitely extend to Galadriel of all people.
Yeah, perhaps in time that's something that would have been resolved by Tolkien.
Maybe. And so maybe there is something to like her rejection of the ring being sort of like her final test.
It is certainly a test.
Yeah.
Not
But-
an externally imposed one, I don't think, so much as as one on herself. It's not like the Valar sent the ring there specifically to test her.
Right. Right. Um, Although, like, from what I understand from other sources, it seems like the Valar did a lot of
I
preparation in order to fight the One Ring.
Yes. Well, there's fingerprints of the Valar all the way through, very subtly.
Yeah,
Um, Stuff
like
like the wind.
not going off on too much of a tangent, but after we did our panel at a San Diego Comic Con, um, one of the audience members came up to me afterwards and was telling me about a chapter in the Peoples of Middle Earth, which is I think volume 12 of the History of Middle Earth.
Yep.
Talking about the two blue wizards, Alatar and Palando, and how their mission was actually to go east and to try to change the hearts of the Southrons and the Easterlings.
Mm.
And so that when their armies did join Sauron, they were actually much smaller than they were supposed to be. Which
It's interesting. I did not know that. But
no,
then,
I didn't know that either, and like I have to look that up. But I thought like that was very interesting because like I mean a lot of people sort of make jokes about how the Blue Wizards did nothing, but I'm like wow, maybe they actually did something very important.
off stage, yes. I was thinking of the wind that blows up on the Pelennor Fields.
Yeah,
It pushes Aragorn's fleet up the river and also blows away the smoke of the enemy. And I think that's a sign of the Valar.
Yeah.
Just a little sign.
yeah, yeah. Like, and I mean Gandalf even says like there are powers at work for good, not just evil. Um, but well, I guess we should start bringing this to a close because we are now at a little over 2 hours on this episode.
Ah,
And it's
so
really
what?
late for you. Like how you're able to still like talk and be coherent is beyond me. So
I'm going to go have coffee shortly.
okay.
And then my workday is going to start.
Oh jeez. Oh my God. I am so sorry. Oh.
That's all right.
Well,
That's been good.
thank you so much for doing this. This has been a really great discussion. With like there was a lot to get through, and so I thank everybody in the chat for putting up with lots of information and a few tangents. But yes, Demosthenes, thank you so much for being a part of this. It was a great help, and some great insight too with the history of Middle Earth, because like I think these chapters more than most of the chapters in the Silmarillion really do skimp on some really crucial details.
It's just the nature of how they were written.
Yeah. But yeah, so thank you everybody in the chat for a great episode. I will see you all next week for the final chapter of the Quinta Silmarillion, which is the big tale of the Silmarillion, not the entire book itself. But we're gonna have we're gonna have a big battle. We're gonna have the final climax and the fate of the Silmarils and the fate of Middle Earth, pretty much. But the story doesn't end there. So so I will see you all next week. Thanks again to Demosthenes and Temple and Eravandi. I stole the One Ring. Ava, some bunch of other people, I'm sure. I see 4 button strummers, which I'm assuming is Button Lady, but I could be wrong. And yeah, everybody else, thank you so much, and I will see you all next week, and never stop reading.